morning, everyone, and warm welcome on behalf of the organizers of this webinar, the Center for the Study of Democracy, the New Geopolitics Research Network and Analysis on Alternatives organization. I think there's no need for much introduction to the topic. You will hear from great speakers today, but I would like to just welcome you to this follow-up webinar that CSD has been organizing and putting up together for the past 5 years, ever since we published and presented in Washington, D.C., the Kremlin Playbook, just before the then US presidential elections in 2016, warning about the very dangerous dependence that has emerged in Europe from Russia and from the different networks that are out there, and very explicitly saying that we need to work on our own vulnerabilities, that the focus should be on us. And I think, unfortunately, we need to acknowledge today that this has played out exactly as we have forewarned, looking at the reactions, particularly in Europe, particularly from countries like Germany, but also Italy and Austria, which we showcased in our second Kremlin Playbook. And of course, countries in Central and Eastern Europe, most notably, of course, Hungary, Bulgaria, but also other countries around the region in their support for Ukraine, and of course, in the capacity of the European Union to react to the aggression of Russia in the region. I will not indulge much further, just to say that we need to reiterate this focus internally on the EU and on Ukraine, that the best defense is essentially cleaning up our act, strengthening our institutions, our democratic credentials. And of course, working on knowing exactly the networks that are at play here, not just the very apparent military ones, but also the hard power through economic means that Russia has engaged with. I mean, these networks have been visible in the gas sector, in energy, first and foremost. But as we were discussing back then, this 1 trillion of money that has outflowed from Russia in the past 30 years, it has essentially been multiplying many, many networks, many of which we don't know, including in a lot of media outlets and so on and so forth. So I think besides the immediate military threat that the region is facing and Ukraine is facing, and of course the eastern members of NATO and the EU are also facing, we have a much longer term perspective that we need to deal with. And with that, allow me to again welcome you to this webinar and to give the floor to my colleague Mihailo Samus, the director from New Geopolitics Research Network. Mihailo.
Hello, everybody. Hello, colleagues. Thanks for joining us in our great event. Definitely, we are meeting today in a very right moment when the global geopolitical center of gravity is concentrating in our region. Interests of major powers and future of nations is mixed and shaped in almost destroyed international relation system. Corrosion of international rules and laws, organization and principle is universal, but corrosion of values is the most dangerous now. And Russia is trying to be a leader in new Middle Ages with rule of force instead of rule of law. Unfortunately, democratic countries doesn't have unity and consolidation against these intentions. Even more cynical simplicity of realpolitik often looks more effective than all of that complicated democratic values. As a result, after 30 years after the end of the Cold War and collapse of Soviet totalitarian system, we have new Cold War, but with unclear composition of the participants and hybrid character of threats. Right now, Ukraine is facing open threat of new aggression by Russia. And I hope that during our event, we will try to find the answers for main questions of the current situation and even develop ideas and advices how to avoid the worst scenario and do not allow to destroy democratic values and unity. Thank you very much and welcome again, even in online format, but I hope it will be very interesting and very effective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michalo. Indeed, we also saw the joint declaration between China's Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin on essentially telling us that democracy could be whatever they wish it would be. So this is really a dangerous path. Now, I would like to turn the floor to our co-host, Ambassador Ilan Vasilyev, who's former ambassador of Bulgaria to Russia and a major driver of these discussions that we're having, and a chairman of the Analysis and Alternatives, and he will be the moderators of today's session. So, Ilan, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ruslan, and I'm very happy to see that we have something to the tune of over 50 people, panelists included. And it's very important because the current crisis is very indicative of where the future stands for Europe and for NATO and for everybody else. I don't believe that there is a zero-sum option here with somebody clearly winning, but we have to step out of the shoes of the imminent crisis and try to foresee what's coming. And I'm very happy that we have gathered all here. I see that all the panelists are on board, so without further ado, I will give the floor to Ambassador Moskalenko. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for agreeing to address this online forum. And we're happy to have you here in Sofia and to raise the flag for Ukraine and for all the things that democracy has been entrusted in us by previous and future generations. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you, Mr. Vasilyev. Distinguished participants, the topics we are discussing today, Russia against Ukraine and NATO, is crisis topics, and I am deeply sorry that we have to talk about such things as confrontation, aggravation of the security situation, threats of the large-scale armed conflict, all these words that are remembered by all the generation who survived the times of Cold War, and that became topical again due to Russians' irresponsible actions. As you read and know, Russia has drawn more than 100,000 troops to the borders of Ukraine, and the temporarily occupied Crimea, for no real reason, has issued a series of ultimatums and plunged Europe into a deep security crisis. The ultimatums issued by the Kremlin, now in the form of documents, simply don't comprise acceptable solutions. Requirements to take or not take some countries into NATO, to withdraw troops from the alliance territory, are unacceptable. All the stories about the mythical threat from NATO, about some fictitious threats from Ukraine, we all understand perfectly well that this is nonsense. As of today, we have data on the recent increase in the number of troops on the Russian-Ukrainian border. It's happening gradually, but the dynamics are present. We also understand that the logical infrastructure allows Russia to make a sharp increase. On a daily basis, Russia is increasing troop levels and weapons system in the occupied Crimea, and staging systems like Iskander short-range ballistic missile systems and other weapons elsewhere near the border. There is an additional problem of gathering troops in the north of Belarusian territory, where joint military exercises with Russia began on February 10 and will run until February 20, involving about 30,000 Russian servicemen, armor, fighter aircrafts, and missile defense systems. The self-proclaimed President Lukashenko has already said that in the event of escalation, his army will support Russia. NATO considers these joint exercises to be the largest military operation in the country since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. In the background of the ongoing increase in its military presence along border with Ukraine on land, Russia is resorting to increasing escalation in the sea that also threatens regional and European security. Under the pretext of holding naval drill, began on 13th February, the Russian Federation is blocking part of the water area of the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov and the Kerch Strait. The areas of naval exercises practically makes impossible freedom of navigation in both seas, which poses a threat to the security of all Black Sea states, causes economic and social consequences for the ports of Ukraine. Such action show that the Russian leadership does not abandon its aggressive plans for Ukraine. There is every reason to believe that naval invasion plans are being tested coastal areas. The situation in the waters of Azov Sea is especially threatening. We call on our international partners to increase political and diplomatic pressure on the aggressor state in order to cancel its decision to close certain areas on the Black and Azov Seas and to stop escalation on the Azov and Black Sea region in violation of the UN Convention of Law of the Sea. Returning to Russia's ultimatums about security guarantees, especially the one seeking to stop NATO enlargement, both past and future, I would like to remind that 2009, our country officially renounced its Euro-Atlantic aspirations by passing special law on a neutral and non-allied status of Ukraine. In early 2014, when this law, I emphasize, was in force, green men appeared in Crimea. The thing is not Ukraine's neutrality. The thing is Russia's aspiration to change the European security order and establish a Russian sphere of influence in Eastern Europe and to redraw borders in Europe by force again, as it already did in 2008 in Georgia and in 2014 when it occupied Ukraine's Crimea and launched the war in Ukraine's eastern region of Donbass. Probably Russia has decided that now is the right time to maximize the degree of tension on demand concessions threatening with force. The only thing that can stop Russia is the firmness and unity of all democratic world and all of Europe, of which Ukraine is an integral part. Ukraine believes the political diplomatic solution is the only way to resolve the conflict. However, we are prepared for all scenarios. We are ready to fight because we know too well what happens if you give up. We see that today the Euro-Atlantic community is more united than ever. Together we are pursuing a powerful policy of deterring Russia from a new wave of aggression. It includes active diplomacy, tough sanction in the event of further escalation, and enhanced defense assistance to Ukraine. Defense weapons coming to Ukraine today from friendly countries are strong arguments for peace and tranquility. We are sincerely grateful to those countries which have already made concrete decision and followed up with respective equipment deliveries. These are important but still initial steps, and bilateral military technical cooperation has to intensify to increase Ukrainians' resilience. We need all these weapons so as not to have to use them. Meanwhile, we are grateful to the Republic of Bulgaria for its solidarity with our country in counteracting Russian aggression for decision statements in support of Ukraine, its sovereignty and territorial integrity within the international recognized borders, including territorial waters and the corresponding active efforts within the EU and NATO. We also welcome the initiative of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Republic of Bulgaria, Teodora Genchevska, to hold the meeting of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs in B9 format in Kiev. Visits of our partners and friends are much appreciated sign and their support. It also keeps the attention of the wider international community on the current situation, thus decreasing the likelihood of the renewed Russian aggression. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much, and I hope that you've set the stage for a very intensive debate. Now, turning on to the first speaker, Vladimir Ogrysko. He's a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine until 2007, and he's current head of the Center for Russian Studies. From Ambassador Moskalenko's presentation, I got several issues that are very interesting and worth discussing further. I read a lot of stuff on Ukraine, but one of the last that I read is on the legitimacy and actually closing the Azov Sea off to international travel is totally illegal under international maritime legislation, and that's one thing. So there's a lot of obscurity when it comes to the diplomacy as the way of resolving the whole issue, basically, because okay, diplomacy might be good in de-escalating, but is diplomacy a way forward to considering the Russian-Ukrainian tension, the annexation of Crimea? So it's a very interesting issue because Russia is simply on the negative side of this. So Volodymyr Ogrysko, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. I wonder whether you hear me well, because it was not so easy to understand what Ambassador Moskalenko told just now, unfortunately, at least for me. Do you hear me well?
Perfectly. I'm hearing you perfectly well. I don't know the rest.
Very good, very good. Dear friends, let me first of all to thank our Bulgarian friends for this very timely discussion. I would say it is utmost important to analyze in depth what is now happening worldwide, to analyze global tendencies, and to provide our policymakers with appropriate conclusions, analysis. So once again, my congratulations. You are doing a great job. Thank you so much. I do understand that you are waiting to get information about Ukraine. I do hope that our interventions with Minister Zagorodnyuk allow you to make adequate picture about current situation in my country and around my country. But taking a little bit broader view on what is happening now, we will see that it is not only about Ukraine. It is about the competition, about global competition between democracy and totalitarianism. In my view, this is today the main global trend. This competition runs along many lines. The West, China, the United States, Russia, NATO, Russia. But there is also another front that directly concerns my country. I specifically used the word front because this confrontation continues already 8 years in the form of very hot war. As you may have guessed, I am talking about the Russian aggression against my country. So in my view, today, Ukraine is the main battlefield between democracy and totalitarian world. Look, as a diplomat and simply adequate, I do still hope, a person, contrary to many Russian officials, I do not rely in my assessments on fake facts or fake news, but on international law. That is why our assessments on what is happening in Ukraine or around Ukraine are absolutely different. Let me probably start with Donbass issue. Russia permanently insists that in Donbass we have an internal Ukrainian conflict. But this is fundamentally wrong. You may ask me why. I think everyone knows this content of the 1974 General Assembly Resolution 3314, defining aggression. I will only remind you there was Article 3 of this resolution, which lists 7 main characteristics of aggression. I will quote only some of them, but they will be enough to understand that this is Russia's aggression against my country. So allow me to quote some, in my view, very important positions of this resolution. So I quote, any of the following acts, regardless of the declaration of war, shall qualify as an act of aggression. A, the invasion or attack by the armed forces of a state of the territory of another state, or any military occupation, however temporary, resulting from such invasion or attack, or any annexation by the use of force of the territory of another state or part thereof. B, bombardment by the armed forces of a state against the territory of another state, or use of any weapons by a state against the territory of another state. C, probably it will be very important for our Bulgarian friends. The blockade of the ports or coasts of a state by the armed forces of another state. And probably this is the last one, G, the sending by or on behalf of the state of armed bands, groups, irregulars, mercenaries, which carry out acts of armed force against another state of such gravity as to amount of the acts listed above, or its substantial involvement therein. End of quotation. So, in fact, we do not need to prove something, because even Mr. Putin, who used to be a president of one country, acknowledged many times that there were Russian troops who occupied Crimea and who attacked Donbass. There are hundreds, probably thousands of such testimonies, and my conclusion is absolutely clear. It is very obvious. Russia is an aggressor state, and Russia should be punished for this aggression. Logically, if there is an attack of a country, it has the right to self-defense under the Article 51 of the UN Charter. It is also every right to turn to every UN member state for help. And what is important in these things, I believe, it is also the direct responsibility of every democracy to provide political, military, economic, etc., assistance to the country that has suffered aggression. And in this regard, I would like to thank Bulgaria many times for its political, humanitarian support and solidarity with Ukraine. I very much appreciate Bulgarian co-sponsorship of the UN General Assembly resolution on Russian-occupied Crimea. I would like only to remind you that in the text of this resolution, Russia Federation and Russian authorities are called the occupying authorities of the Russian Federation. And in my view, it is a very important part of the international law. Another resolution, which is also supported by Bulgaria, condemned the militarization of the Crimea and parts of the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. My special gratitude goes to Bulgarian friends for participation in the Crimean platform. This platform, as you know, unites representatives from the civilized world who reject the possibility to use in 21st century the rules of the 19th century. Borders are inviolable and no one can change them by force. This is undeniable imperative of our time. You may ask me why Russia decided to fight against Ukraine now. My answer is very simple, because it is her last, I would like to repeat, last chance to restore the Soviet Union and to come back to restore spheres of influence. And Russian demands to get security guarantees is absolutely exactly about the same. You can imagine only the level of cynicism to capture foreign territories, not only in Ukraine, but also in Georgia, in Moldova, threaten Ukraine with new invasions, kill Ukrainian citizens practically every day, and demand guarantees. For me, it's outrageous. Of course, we can also say about something about Minsk agreements. First, in my view, and this is not only my assessment, there are no agreements at all. Why? Because they were signed and will never be adopted by Ukrainian parliament. They have no judicial power for Ukraine at all. Russia's argument that they have been adopted by the UN Security Council resolution is another manipulation, because the resolutions of that kind are also not of obligatory nature, and in fact are only political declarations.
I'm sorry, time, and please close up in 30 seconds so that we'll lead to the questions, because we have to be very rigid on the time.
Sorry?
We have to be very tight on the time, so I would appreciate if you close in 30 seconds.
Okay. My conclusions in that sense. What political conclusions can and shall we take? First, to stop to repeat Russian narratives that there are no alternatives to Minsk arrangements. Second, all democratic countries should officially acknowledge that Russia is the aggressor country and Ukraine is the victim of this Russian aggression. And third, Russia should be punished as the country which violated principles of the current international law. Of course, it is should be done not by airstrikes, but they should be very tough economic strikes, and not saying that if Russia will do something, then we will apply something against Russia. But already for crimes committed by Russia in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova, in Syria, etc., etc., against, by the way, European capitals, against European countries, intervening in the internal affairs, etc., etc. So my conclusion is as follows. Ukraine is ready to stop Russian aggression. The question is whether the West can do the same. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Volodymyr. And well, technical stuff. Please ask questions and write them down, and we will have the discussion at the end of all the presentations, all the introductions. So stay tuned, and I would wish that there are lots of questions, but they would be asked at the end. Andrei Zagorodnyuk, he's head of the Center for Defense Strategies, the former Minister of Defense of Ukraine. So he's a very knowledgeable man. So I'm looking forward to him updating us on the current state. I don't believe that he would give us the exact details on the war situation in the war room, but please, we need your update.
Good morning. Do you hear me well? Is it?
Perfect, perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah, I can give you precise situation if you like. We have like number of tanks, number of armored vehicles and planes and even the submarines if you wish. But I don't think we have time for this. The key thing is this. We have about 147 147,800 troops currently. It's 87 battalion tactical groups, which is the number which is unprecedented since pretty much all the time. So that collection of troops we never had before. And most of them are battlefield ready. So some of them are actually in a high state of readiness because they at the same time have exercises with Belarus. They are very close to Ukrainian border and they're a few hours from Kiev if to look at the map. So this is something which obviously is creating a threat for Ukraine, particularly if we combine this with the active propaganda in Russian TV and Belarus TV now. And at the same time, we have a very serious information campaigns which happen in temporary occupied territories, which are known like Donbass, occupied part of Donbass. They are constantly sending messages that Ukraine is alleged to attack, alleged messages that Ukraine is going to attack these territories and they need to defend. And so the kind of the expectation of the war is constantly being boiled in local TV, preparing people that something may happen. For us, it's signs of a substantial threat, and we do believe that the threat level for some sort of military activity acceleration is quite real still. As you know, U.S. and other Western statements are much more dramatic and much more, much more precise, that saying that the invasion of Russia to Ukraine is going to happen tomorrow, on 16th, or may happen tomorrow now. And we obviously have our troops in the high state of readiness, especially around Kiev, especially in the east, so where the risks are highest. We think that Kiev scenario is quite exotic, I may say, because Kiev is surrounded by lots of Ukrainian troops ready to defend. So any scenario of capturing Kiev, or because it's been actively considered in the Western press and by the Western analysts and by the Western officials. So that scenario is in a way doomed to be extremely tragic, and both for Ukraine and for Russia. So based on that, we think that Russia will try to use some other means more likely than trying to attack Kiev and lose thousands of its own soldiers on the way to Kiev. And then Kiev is very difficult to keep. So basically all of those scenarios, which are very actively discussed around the experts and around media. And I have to tell you that right now in Kiev, there's like all media from the whole world. So we have like thousands of journalists from all top channels currently sitting in Kiev and daily broadcasting the news events and so on. So we have here like 7 crews from BBC, several crews from NBC, several crews from CNN. So honestly speaking, Ukraine never had that much media attention in its history. Obviously, we would rather wish that it has some other reason for that, but the global attention is unprecedented. But in any case, we think that a full-scale invasion with that number of troops is not realistically possible. The Kiev invasion technically is possible, but practically it would be extremely difficult. And for Russia, it's not really expedient to start that campaign. However, that's all based on their reasonable thinking, and we have seen some some alarming messages, alarming pictures from Moscow, like how they do meetings right now and how do they anyway. But if they're still reasonable, they're obviously not going to attack Kiev and not going to attack like Ukraine on a full scale. So the highest risk for us right now is still Donbass. And of course, we need to say about the Black Sea accumulation of forces. So Black Sea right now, they have unprecedented amount of forces from all around Russia. So they're bringing forces from Pacific Fleet, from Northern Fleet, which is like thousands of kilometers or nautical miles to go to until they reach Black Sea. Obviously from Baltic Fleet and from Caspian Fleet now, they're preparing ships. And so that all is occupying northern part of the Black Sea. That creates, of course, the danger for the commercial shipments. So they closed a huge chunk of the Black Sea for missile exercises. This is the first time such a large part was closed. That means that many ships have to divert. So which means that insurance companies already raised their pricing. So the shipment to Ukraine became already more expensive. So that already hurts Ukrainian economy and so on. But more importantly, Russia is the way Russia looks at strategy and basically at its actions. It always has number of plans, and it always have a very adaptive and very agile strategies. So we believe that the most important part which we have to see in this what's happening in Black Sea is they're looking what reaction of the global community is going to be and what reaction of Ukraine is going to be. So if reaction is that this is unacceptable, this is occupation, this is something like this is a violation of the sovereign rights of Ukraine, etc., and there are some consequences, they will rethink whether to do this next time. But if there is a mild reaction and soft reaction or no reaction whatsoever, the time when it happens again is just a matter of time. It's important. But we need to say that global community has been extremely active right now on diplomatic front in order to prevent this war. We have calls, as you may know, but we have calls from all global leaders to Putin, to his ministers, so there is an unprecedented campaign of warning them that this unsubstantiated and unjust war, which they are maybe they plan to start, and our intelligence tells us that they did have those plans. So it's not like it's all made up, or it's not like it's just gathering of the forces. No, they did have plans. Whether they were planning to launch them or not, that depended on our reaction, and that depended on our readiness and the global community resolution. But yeah, they are absolutely considered that, at least. So right now we see this unprecedented pressure campaign from everyone not to start the war. And of course, we understand that whatever can be done now should be done now, because preventing war is extremely much easier than to deal with its consequences. So we have shipments of we have like tens of tons of weapons arriving to Kiev on a daily basis right now, mainly from UK and US, but also from some other countries, like Lithuania shipped Stingers yesterday. The key thing is obviously to deter. So readiness is the best deterrent, and we already have anti-tank missiles 3 times more than Russia has tanks generally in the forces, and obviously more than they have like right now on our borders. And so we can actually create some substantial resistance to them. Of course, we have a problem with the air tactical aviation, combat aviation. We have problem with air defense, just a misbalance with the power, and obviously with the Navy capability. But on the ground, Ukrainian forces can create a very substantial resistance. We are filling our territorial defense. It's oversubscribed, so people are entering, and so generally the morale in Ukraine that people are going to defend. So generally speaking, there are all indicators to Putin that it's wise not to start that campaign. We'll see what happens. The critical time is right now. So the critical period is this week and the beginning of the next week, because they have to finish on 20th these exercises in Belarus. And now they have to decide whether they're staying or whether they're moving somewhere or go home. Some of the troops in Belarus are from Far East, so that's a long way to go. Of course, we encourage them to go, but and there was a call yesterday with Belarus Minister of Defense and Ukrainian Minister. Belarus Minister is trying to assure that there is no invasion plan, and obviously Belarus is friendly Of course, if you look at Belarus TV and statements of Belarus so-called leader, who we didn't recognize, of course, they are unfriendly. They're not, and so it's still a risk. It's a huge risk, and they're totally dependent on Russia. So it's a big deal. But nevertheless, I would suggest if someone wants to look more in the details of this, we published a report in Ukrainska Pravda, which was read by 500,000 people in less than 3 days, about analytical report about the scenarios. It's been translated to English, so I can send the link here if you like. It's a full report with numbers of troops available, with possible analysis of scenarios, with the map, and so on. Also, what happens in the Black Sea, honestly speaking, was expected, and sadly, NATO didn't produce any strategy, literally any working strategy about deterring Russia in the Black Sea, despite we've been discussing it with them since 2019, at least since 2018 actually, at least, but 19 I was already talking, and then since then there was a constant pressure. Let's do something jointly. Let's come up with some plan. So far that didn't happen, and we warned in 2020 exactly that what would happen in the Black Sea right now. The report is called Storm Warning. It was published at the end of 2020. It's still valid. I can upload it here. And also on the Black Sea situation, there's a very good article published yesterday in Jamestown Foundation by Admiral Kabanenko. He's describing the situation very well, so suggest to read. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it was very informative. The problem is such informative presentation is that they always give rise to a number of questions, of course. And I would particularly like you, after we engage in discussions, to address the issue of their initial plan to link Crimea to the continental, to the rest of Russia through the Novorossiya, and by closing the Azov Sea. They probably is one of the plans that they have on mind. Now, Vladimir Milov is an old friend of mine. We've known each other for quite some time. He is a former deputy minister of energy in the old days when he designed a strategy for restructuring Gazprom that cost him the post. Then he engaged in a number of activities. Currently, he's associate of Wilfred Martin Center for European Studies, and also one of the most active voices of Russia's opposition. He's one of the closest partners of Navalny. He was a friend and a close partner of Boris Nemtsov. By the way, in understanding Russia, Nemtsov's words are very, very, very useful. What he said about Putin and his reasons and motivations for addressing Ukrainian problem. Vladimir, are you online?
Yes, yes. Can you hear me?
Great, Vladimir. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, my dear friend, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of such an interesting and informative debate. And I'm also happy to hear that these tensions between Russia and Ukraine at the moment are actually put in a more broad context, the context of a rivalry between two systems. We're not back to the Cold War times yet, but unfortunately, we are moving somewhere in that direction, because there is a very clear cartel group of authoritarian dictatorships which are effectively involved in an onslaught on democratic values and rule-based order across the world. It's important, unfortunately, not too many people notice and put this in the same context. When Vladimir Putin had visited Beijing on February the 4th, they issued a joint declaration with Xi Jinping. It has been mentioned briefly today, but I think it deserves more attention, because that is a very big, a very detailed declaration of war against democratic rule-based order. Basically, it denies the very necessity for rule-based order in the modern world. It denies the concept of modern-day democracy as we know it. It says democracy is something different that we, a bunch of dictators, powerhouses define. So that's, I think we should be revisiting this declaration again and again, because it gives you an idea what's the vision of dictators, how to address the issues of the modern world, and it's a very unfortunate vision because it is not defensive. If you read it carefully, it clearly says that dictators consider themselves to be on the offensive. They consider democracies to be weak. They want to continue stepping on to get bigger zones of influence, to undermine international rule-based order, Western institutions, and so on. Like, for instance, China has joined a Russian outcry about NATO enlargement, despite the actual facts on the ground. Like, I remember 1980s when we had 250,000 American troops in Europe. We had all the hype about Pershing missiles in Germany and all that receded. Americans have been pulling back from Europe. There's been peace and security in Europe for 40 years now, but this is all disregarded, and NATO enlargement is perceived by Putin as a fake, fabricated threat. So China have joined these calls against NATO enlargement, basically against the right of sovereign states to actually join themselves together in a mutual security alliance. That is very important. So it's not just about what happens around Ukraine, is that Ukraine is currently on a forefront, defending the democratic world from this onslaught offensive by a collective group of powerful autocracies who simply want to change the world order. So I think it's important to look at issues in this context. And this is why, coming back to like Minsk agreements, whatever, I see a lot of mistakes on part of the Western politicians who continue to treat what is happening between Russia and Ukraine as some sort of local issue, you know. They have some historic issues, language issues, territorial issues, whatever. So let's treat it like that. It's not about that. It's about Putin actually being extremely wounded by the fact that Ukraine had never bowed to his desire to include it into his post-Soviet authoritarian perimeter. There's been multiple attempts over the years, but Ukraine had always resisted. And actually, it's very important also to us in Russia, because that gives us hope that there can be resistance, that Putin's autocratic rule is not something determined, not something that will last forever. There is an example of a country which stood up and did not allow Putin to establish same kind of dictatorships as he would prefer to see across Eurasia. So Ukraine is currently on the front lines of this global battle for democracy, and it's important that when we discuss whether Putin will or will not attack Ukraine at the moment, whatever happens now, he will come back. Until Putin and his gang are in power in Russia, they will be coming back to haunt Ukraine, because they are really badly wounded by the fact that all their project of establishing exclusive Russian dictatorial zone of influence over the post-Soviet space had failed because of Ukraine. Because if you do not control Ukraine, that means that your hopes of controlling the whole post-Soviet space have failed. So they will be coming back around. And it was very interesting to listen to Minister Zagradnyuk. I personally do not think that what we see right now with the massing Russian troops is a disposition for an outright of military offensive onto Ukrainian territory. There are not enough troops for that. And there is no clear military goal, because the only goal which can justify the consequences for Putin will be taking over significant territory of Ukraine, including Kiev, to establish a puppet government, which is, I don't think, it's not at all possible with the current number of troops. I don't think it's generally possible at all, because Russia doesn't have a sufficient number of combat-ready troops to fulfill that task. Russian army is extremely poor and underpaid. They essentially have no motivation to fight. Their salaries have not been properly indexed since 2012. That's official. You can take a look at the discussion on the federal budget in the Russian State Duma, the parliament. Putin's party-controlled Committee on Defense actually annually raises an outcry saying, listen, We need to index salaries of the military servicemen, which is only about 20% of the Russian defense budget now. They have devalued about twice during all this depreciation of ruble in the past years. So essentially, we don't know how many really strong combat-ready forces are there in the Russian army. If they really invade large parts of territory of Ukraine, they're going to engage in urban warfare, which is very bloody and messy. They tried it a couple of times with cities like Mariupol during the outbreak of conflict in 2014, 2015. They retreated. In Mariupol, they retreated twice. It's a very important experience to understand. So generally, I do not think that Putin is going to launch a full-scale attack this time. However, he's trying, testing the ground. What can he do? How he can better prepare for maybe a full-scale, real full-scale invasion next time. Testing what the Western reaction would be. Unfortunately, it's despite a lot of solidarity on some parts, it is weak, like providing Ukraine with air defense, for instance, or as Minister Zagradnyuk has been mentioning, the problem of effective blockade of North Black Sea is not being resolved, and the West is not doing anything about it. So some issues, attack or no attack, some issues Putin will already pick up from this standoff of recent months. He might continue the blockade in the Black Sea, which will be very disruptive for the Ukrainian economy. He accumulated a lot of evidence about the potential Western reaction. Our companies and banks did the stress tests on potential Western sanctions. He gathered a lot of intelligence. He's probably better prepared to launch a full-scale operation next time. But I will conclude again with the fact that I believe this is not about this time. This is not about whether he would invade on February 16th or whatever other day. He will be coming back around because there is a systemic problem. He's extremely unhappy with the fact that Ukraine is a democracy, that Ukraine have chosen a different pattern of development that did not bow to his demands of becoming a part of Eurasian dictatorial pedestal. That is a bad wound, not only for Putin, but for all of the Russian militarized and post-imperial elite. So this threat is not receding, and it's a part of a global threat of autocracies being on the offensive against a democratic world. So I think we should address this problem in a broader context, such as it is, and also look at how many other dictatorships in the world are essentially helping each other to survive. That's important to know that, you know, Syria, Venezuela, Belarus, these dictatorships wouldn't, or Kazakhstan recently, they would not have survived if not the assistance from their dictatorial allies from across the globe. So I think we should look at all these issues in a more global context to find a solution to this challenge. Thank you.
Ilian, you're muted. You should unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, I'm sorry. So we've closed the first section of the geopolitical state of play in the Ukrainian-Russian. Keep your questions for the discussion side. Very grateful to all of you three. We didn't touch on the indivisibility of security, the new Russian sort of favorite song on when it comes to security. Then we didn't touch a lot about the, and that's what I would like to, we could focus on the outcome, because it seems that what Lavrov said yesterday, that Putin feels that if he backtracks and he de-escalates, he would grant the West a diplomatic victory, which they can't afford. So, and as we all know, pride in Russia, particularly of the Tsarist elite, is something very, very, very elusive. Now we turn to the second part, Russia's economic influence in Black Sea region, and here is Martin Vladimirov, who is Energy and Climate Program Director with the Center for the Study of Democracy. Martin, where are you at?
Hello, Ilian, and thank you for the invitation. It's been a great panel, very thought-provoking. I just saw that there is an announcement that Russia is pulling back some of its troops back to bases. So hopefully this is a good sign and the crisis will be averted. But now I'll try to kind of focus on something what we call follow the money, to understand better how Russia operates in Europe and operates in the region. I'll share my screen. I hope you can see it. Let me start the presentation.
Yeah, it's good.
So I'll try to be as brief as possible, although the discussion of the Kremlin playbook, which is CSD, long-running series of reports on analyzing Russian economic influence in different countries in Europe, is a long one, but I'll try to zoom in on the Black Sea region and on Ukraine, which is our latest analysis from early 2020. So some of the data could be a bit old. But just briefly on the Kremlin playbook, we started working on an assessment of the different mechanisms that Russia has been using in expanding its economic and political presence in different European countries back in 2014, when actually the topic for Russian economic influence was not quite attractive, both in DC or in European capitals. Even after the annexation of Crimea and the beginning of the Donbas conflict, there was little attention to how the Kremlin operates in different countries and what are the dimensions of the economic influence and how this economic presence is leveraged to achieve an outsized political influence. So we prepared the Kremlin playbook report, the first one, which is on the right side of this slide. This provided kind of an overview of several weak links in Central and Eastern Europe. And since then, we have covered now 20 countries all across the continent, including Western Europe. Most recently, as I mentioned, some Black Sea countries, Moldova, Ukraine, and Armenia. So how does the Kremlin playbook work? Probably the main mechanism for expanding economic and political influence is what we call the vicious cycle of state capture, in which the Kremlin is able to exploit local governance deficits in different countries, especially in key institutions that regulate markets, energy markets, telecommunication markets, and exploit these weaknesses to capture strategic assets, to capture an important share of the market. This is especially visible in the energy sector. And as Russian networks, usually these oligarchic networks that work with their counterparts locally, so it's kind of what we call partners in crime. So Russian oligarchic networks and local oligarchic networks work together to take over some of these strategic assets and strategic companies. As they do that, as they keep on expanding their presence, they are able to entrench further these networks of influence and basically create the mechanisms for affecting strategic decision making. So economic influence translates then into political influence and ultimately kind of synchronizes in what we call state capture. When we have this main kind of pattern of influence explained, then we try to kind of look at the different instruments that Russia has been using in enabling the state capture. One of the main kind of factors has been the ability of Russian companies to penetrate deeply financial and trade markets all across Europe. And in many cases, this has been done very non-transparently. We are talking about a massive movement of capital from Russia to Europe estimated at more than $1 trillion since 1990. In many cases, this capital has a very obfuscated, very non-transparent ownership, which can allow both, oligarchic circles, but also the Kremlin to operate basically in the shadows to conceal real economic and political activities, and in this way allow Russian structures, companies, and political actors to capture, to basically determine significant strategic decisions, using the funds to buy economic elites locally. We have seen that in the case of large-scale projects in Europe, like Nord Stream 2, like Turk Stream, in which basically Russian companies have locked their European counterparts in long-term asymmetrical relationships, from which these European businesses benefit, and which are then used to basically influence strategic decision-making on energy policy, on defense, and on other related issues. Zooming in now on Ukraine, Armenia, and Moldova, we see that, and it's important to know that in our assessment of the economic footprint, we focus on first structural trade dependencies, then foreign direct investments, and we try to estimate the real value of these FDIs, meaning based on their ultimate beneficial ownership. And then finally, we focus on corporate footprint, so the presence of Russian companies in different economies. So the first factor, trade and economic dependencies, remain probably one of the most powerful economic tools that Russia has been using in the Black Sea region, because the imports of oil and gas remain the main element of the bilateral trade imbalance. And this imbalance at certain periods of this century has gone to up above 7%, 8% of GDP, which is a major macroeconomic vulnerability that Russia has been exploiting in order to pressure countries to change their foreign policy orientation or their strategic energy policy. In many cases, Ukraine obviously has been a case in point. But since 2014, we have seen, especially Ukraine, diversifying away from Russia, moving closer to Europe in terms of trade patterns. Oil and gas dependence has diminished significantly. Basically, Ukraine does not import directly Russian gas. It imports all of its necessities from Europe via the existing interconnectors with Slovakia and Hungary. But at what price is the question? Even though the dependence has gone down, the price that Ukraine is paying for these oil and gas resources is very high, and Russia is again taking advantage of that. Part of this kind of structural dependence is also that Russia controls, in many cases, like Moldova and Armenia, the main, basically, oil and gas assets in the countries, in some cases also the nuclear assets. And by controlling them, it can leverage that to pressure governments on strategic policy.
The time, please.
Yes, sorry, I'll try to move a bit faster.
30 seconds.
Yes, well, 30 seconds. So focusing on Russian foreign direct investment, as you can see, it has been going down. It is important to note that the real value of the Russian foreign direct investment is probably much higher than the reported statistics shows, because a lot of the Russian FDI comes actually from third-party jurisdictions like the Netherlands, Luxembourg, the British Virgin Islands, etc. So it could be much higher. And as we know, Russia has registered some of its largest companies in such jurisdictions, and they control major companies and major assets in these three countries. This is also visible in, this is also relevant to the corporate footprint. As you can see, it has been declining significantly in the past decade, especially in Moldova, as the laundromat case there exposed many connections with Russia and then pushed Russian capital out of the country to other destinations. Ukraine has become also much more resilient to Russian corporate footprint. Basically, there are very few large-scale Russian companies operating in Ukraine right now, but it is possible that many of them have just changed ownership structures as to avoid the scrutiny of Ukrainian law on Russian ownership, and they keep on operating via intermediaries. Just finally, how does economic footprint also translates into political influence? Russia uses a number of political amplifiers, and we all know them, but most importantly, these are the frozen conflicts in Crimea, Donbass, Transnistria, Nagorno-Karabakh. They can be always activated when necessary in order to pressure governments, even on strategic deals. In Moldova, we see that all the time. Whenever there are negotiations between the local gas company, which is owned by Gazprom, and Gazprom proper, there is always some tension in Transnistria. So what should be done? Very, very final words. There is a need to focus much more closely on diversification of capital. Both the US and the EU should work together on bringing more constructive capital, using leveraging initiatives such as the Free Seas initiative to basically put an umbrella, a political and strategic umbrella on Western capital to kind of shift the direction of markets in this region to unlock the potential for innovative, high added value capital to basically prosper in these countries. Exactly because of the state capture networks that control strategic sectors in these countries, there is little opportunity for Western capital to penetrate, and this is exploited successfully by Russia.
I'm sorry.
Stop economic development. Sorry, I'm closing on this argument, and thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. It's very informative. I strongly recommend that you send the full presentation to the teams, your team, the Ukrainian team, so that we can share it with afterwards, because afterwards people will have more time. Well, I'm very grateful for you to putting the emphasis on the importance of the strongest weapon Ukraine has. It's to build a functioning democracy, and I believe this is the ultimate revenge or the ultimate response to Russian aggression. There's also one thing that I've always been considering: why Ukraine has not raised an equal level of negation or resistance or any type of reaction on the Turk Stream, with all the criticism has gone into Nord Stream 2, and it has relatively remained mute on Turk Stream. And the reason here is that we are not using the reverse flow of Trans-Balkan pipeline, for example, for Azeri gas supplies to Ukraine, which might play a substantial role. And I believe that is one of the ways in which Bulgaria can also contribute. Now, Vasco Natchev is a board member of Alternatives and Analysis. Vasco, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ilan. I have not prepared a presentation, but let me just say a few sentences that related to energy security in our region. Energy security is sophisticated and multifaceted concept that is paramount importance for general security achievement of every country. In up-to-date concepts, one of the prior strategic goals of every country is long-term provision of energy and the lowest cost. Energy security in that regard is provision of steady energy supply of different types and sources. Diversification is very popular words so far, and stability in the energy markets. its support is connected with the solution to the crisis, protection of key infrastructure, maintenance of economic stability, and search for alternative energy supply lines. Economic and geopolitical process of the latest years are the reason to enrich energy security paradigm. So the basic factor of phenomenon are pandemic as the result from COVID-19, financial crisis. You know, the Europe Central Bank is printing more and more money, which is pulling the inflation spiral and increasing vulnerability of critical energy infrastructure. Today, the main problems in energy security fields are growing dependence of most advanced industrial countries on gas supply, necessity to establish new energetic infrastructure, climate change, political instability, and also the attempt of Russia to use, as you know, energy supply for political influence. For a long time, the Black Sea region hasn't been considered as European periphery, but as the union of the axis, the Caspian Sea, the Black Sea, and Europe. So its significance for global states such the USA and especially for the European Union is predicted upon their growing need in diversification of energy supply to decrease the dependence on energy sources extracted in Russia. So the Black Sea region is strategically important on several grounds. Firstly, some countries of the region, for example, Russia, Azerbaijan as well, are large energy suppliers for not only for their neighbors, but for all Europe, we can say. Secondly, other countries such as Ukraine, Turkey, Bulgaria are energy transit countries, and they are subject of world energy market in that capacity. Most countries of the region are considerable energy consumer as well. So significant part of energy in the Black Sea region is due to primarily the Russia, which is the main gas and oil producer and supplier. The share of Russia in world oil production is about 37%. The participation of the Russian for gas production is even more impressive. The country produced 41% of the world supplies. So
the European.
Yeah. So the country is expected to preserve leadership in gas supply because it's account about quarter of world natural gas fields. So in front of us is the big question, how to reduce those dependence. In my opinion, if there is no political will for such a thing, no matter what discussion we have, it will fall into nothing. So that's all what I can say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I get two practical proposals for the Ukrainian side to raise the issue of the Trans-Balkan pipeline free reverse flow, because it's not all about Azeri gas flow, but also access to LNG, so that it opens the southern access to the southern gas corridor. And it's not only Azerbaijan, it's Eastern Mediterranean and LNG, of course. And then that's how, and that's a very practical issue that Ukraine and Bulgaria can do together, because things are, the technical capacity is there. As Vasco rightly said, it's the political will. And please focus on that. And the second thing, you can raise your voice. Turk Stream is basically allowing Russia to occupy its capacity in this transit infrastructure that deny other competitors access to this as well. Okay, this, then it is, we are closing this. Keep your questions for the finale as the of the discussions stage, and then we enter into the next topic, so to say, Europe's hottest zone, Ukraine. What's to expect? We've seen and we've heard a lot from Andriy and from Volodymyr and from Vladimir, but also I'll give the floor now to Mikhailo Samas, the director of the new, our partner actually, the new Geopolitics Research Network. I recall a phrase that geopolitics is the art of the empires to extort additional money from smaller nations, and it's not something that smaller nations should indulge in. But now I'm afraid it's even for Russia, it's too risky a venture to indulge in geopolitics, because apart from anything else, it is costly for it as well. Mikhailo?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for this great event. Actually, we are co-organizer, but I'm just delighted of listening and writing down a lot of information, a lot of new thoughts, great estimation on this very hard time. And of course, about geopolitics, from my understanding that we will try to use the geopolitics instruments to try to concentrate all of possible information, data, and try to make analysis and then make recommendations and conclusions. So in our understanding, geopolitics not instrument by empire, but our instrument for researchers. To be very short, because I understand that we don't have any time to make a great and long presentations. I very like all of previous speakers, and I just want to add that actually our team, we were talking about the military estimations on Russians, at least in 2016, when Russia built up the military infrastructure, what we're talking about now. So first tank army, the 20th army and 8th army, which we're talking about the more than 1,000 troops, they built actually like 10 kilometers, some units 10 kilometers from Ukrainian border since 2016. When the Minsk agreement was signed in 2014 and 2015, and Russia immediately started to build a new military infrastructure against Ukraine. So in August 2016, we made estimations that Russia actually ready for full-scale operations. It was in 2016. Every year, Russia was trying to deploy more forces. They conducted huge military exercises. For example, they conducted military exercises east, Vostok, and center. And especially on the Vostok, they collected 300,000 troops in eastern part of Russia. And why we estimated this time that Russia is not ready actually for full-scale operations with real military characteristic, because as Ukraine has 200,000 regular forces and approximately 350,000 of first line reserve, which it means that this is the soldiers and officers which have military and battle experience and ready to be in their units for several hours. So we have kind of approximately 500,000 troops in several days. And of course, 100,000 and 30,000 troops from Russia, it's not enough to make a successful operation at least. But what we're always talking about, that Russia will use hybrid operations, and military instrument only one of them. And what we have now, I just like to add to all of our friends and colleagues' estimations, my analysis on what we have now exactly on this minute. It was great. I think it was great counted hybrid operations, because when we look what we've got in Ukraine now, we've got an attempt of trying to close Ukrainian airspace, to close commercial airlines to participate in Ukraine. It could be huge impact on Ukrainian economical situation, and I will add for psychological stability of Ukrainian society, of course. We've got the closing of maritime commercial lines now. We've got a lot of movement of some headquarters of business companies, of Western business companies, moving from the Kiev to western part of Ukraine, or even to the Poland. And why we've got this? Because of huge informational campaign. What was very interesting to analyze, because together with Russians, the Western media has participated in this. And it's very difficult to explain who is the leader on this informational operation, because sometimes Western media were even more intensive to create a very strong psychological impact on Ukrainians. And I think we are absolutely great people, Ukrainians, I mean, because we still keep calm on all of these huge pressure on military instruments by Russians, on the informational impact on the global information space, economical instruments by Russians closing Ukrainian air commercial space, maritime links, commercial links, and of course all of these psychological together with cyber impact and instruments. What we have now, I think that Russia was very ready that Ukrainians will start panic, and it will be chaos, and this chaos will produce the new protests and destabilization inside of Ukraine. And if we have destabilization inside of Ukraine, 130,000 troops, it's enough to conduct humanitarian intervention. Because can you imagine during the winter when we have a panic in such cities like Kyiv, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Odessa, Dnipro, Lviv, even Lviv, and all of these cities, more than 1 million people. And if refugees started to run to the western part, no electricity or no food, it's a winter, it's a cold. So I think it was the main and general plan for Russians. And fortunately, Ukrainians still keep calm. Even we have now 15th of February, and they promised us to have a military operation on 16th. I think we should analyze these operations very attentively on next months, but it was very strong and very intensive. And I think that one of the purpose of this, of course, to make Ukrainians to make some concessions in Minsk agreements, to some concessions in NATO positions, I mean intentions to the NATO. My conclusion now, of course, the military threat from Russia is absolutely high. Russians collected a huge amount of missiles. They have like 200 missiles around Ukraine in the first wave, and these submarine ships and Iskanders in Belarus now, Iskanders around Ukraine. And from military point of view, they are ready to attack us every day. Even now, Russians will say that we stop totally exercises. Nothing. It's nothing for Ukraine, because I repeat, since August 2016, they have all of military infrastructure around Ukraine ready to attack. This first tank army, 20th army, and 8th Army, some units stay in the permanent positions of the unit 10 kilometers from Ukrainian border, even headquarters of some divisions. It's crazy from the military point of view, because it's very easy to destroy these headquarters, but they absolutely ready to attack, not defense. So my conclusions: military threat is very high, but hybrid warfare will be used every day, and we should be ready for next attacks. And my last point, I think that the United States now, they played not very positive role in this hybrid warfare attack, because the movement of all the U.S. embassy from Kiev to Lviv, this is very bad sign for all of business and all of economical players in Ukraine. And of course, the fact that we don't have any NATO vessel now, military vessel now in the Black Sea. I mean, non-literal vessel, non-Black Sea. I think it's a very bad sign, because if we're talking about some joint hybrid operations, we need to conduct joint hybrid operations, and we need to be a leader of this, not reflex, not the answer on Russian hybrid attacks. So I think we should estimate the consequences of these Russian hybrid attacks and try to plan next hybrid attacks on Russia, because otherwise we will always only answer, and we will be on a very big problems next time. Thank you very much, and I hope it will be a lot of questions.
Thank you, Mikhailo. Thank you for reminding us that the issue of whether Russia will attack militarily is not the real issue. Russia has been in war for quite some time. Disinformation, hybrid, all different types of war. So therefore, whether the military would cross the border with Ukraine is a different issue. We are at war, and that is important. Now, next we have in line Velizar Shalamanov, the Director of Defense Capabilities of the Atlantic Club of Bulgaria. He's a known expert, and probably one of the best top experts in Bulgaria, a former Minister of Defense. Therefore, I'm looking forward to his contribution to this interesting debate. Velizar, please.
Thank you very much, Ilian, for your kind introduction, and good morning to everyone. A very informative and motivating webinar. So I will be short, focusing on 4 key points. First of all, I fully agree it is a long-term tension that will be kind of managed with the initiative of Kremlin if we are not taking this more seriously and as something really global. So from Russian perspective, I believe it is considered more as intelligence gathering and influence campaign to prepare really for the future steps, but they cannot withdraw troops now without certain tangible achievement in brackets. So I think the campaign they started threatening us that will recognize Donetsk and Lugansk People Republic, and most probably will try to make official our military presence there through the peacekeeping type of presence, is something that we cannot exclude. It is why our plan for de-escalation has to include really demilitarization of Donetsk and Lugansk. It means disarmament and disbanding of all these illegal armed formations. And it will be clear that through such activity, a lot of Russian origin military equipment will be found. So this is very important to be part of our effort for de-escalation, not just to reduce the concentration of troops along the borders. And it is very important to be part of our plans in NATO and EU because otherwise Ukraine will be in difficult situation to be blamed for using force in this region. So second point is that I think it is time for much more active defense cooperation with Ukraine, including defense technical cooperation, especially for Bulgaria. The agreement achieved between UK, Poland and Ukraine is a very good example. I think for Bulgaria, cooperation with Ukraine is a key instrument to cut dependence on Russia when it comes to Soviet-produced equipment, and maybe to really move forward with using this equipment jointly with Ukraine. Even more, I think such type of defense technical cooperation between Ukraine, Poland, Ukraine and Bulgaria could actually motivate kind of interoperability and readiness program to be developed within NATO using two NATO agencies, NATO Support and Procurement Agency and NATO Communication Information Agency. There are already several trust funds that were established under with these two agencies and leading nations like Canada, UK, Germany, US, Romania, Bulgaria. But it could be consolidated now because we have to plan for long-term tension and deterrence measures. And last but not least, what I want to focus on is this EU part related to resilience. Of course, now we are developing our national recover and resilience plans that are mostly related to COVID and some other disturbances. But I think that in the framework of the long-term tension with Russia and all the problems with energy security and all other type of hybrid activities that are actually trying to exploit our vulnerabilities, we cannot be successful in achieving resilience without addressing this in the context of Russian hybrid attacks, and without, and I fully agree with what you, Ilian, said, without engaging with Ukraine to try to support economic resilience, energy resilience of Ukraine as well, really not to accept this pressure from Russia to reduce investments in Ukraine, to reduce our business engagement with Ukrainian partners. I have very good examples of people from Bulgaria that are active economically in Ukraine. So we have to find any opportunity to support this. But and I will finish with this. For me, the core of this change, this serious change, is really enhanced military technical cooperation involving companies from Ukraine, from Bulgaria, from Poland, from other NATO nations, involving NATO agencies, and really giving a strong signal to Russia that we will do everything possible without the deployment of NATO troops in Ukraine to support Ukraine, and that the case of Ukraine is critical case for us. It's even more critical than it is for Kremlin and for Putin. And we stay firm, we stay committed, and we'll keep our integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Velizar. And I trust that there's a lot we need to do in the field of energy security, and particularly the Black Sea, to stand off, to build sufficient capacity to withstand Russian pressure in the Black Sea, and that's a major issue. Now, I'm giving the floor to Professor Yuri Fedorov, who's a known Russian foreign and security policy expert. I've read quite a lot of his analysis and work that he's done recently, and I'm looking forward with great interest to his introduction.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. And dear colleagues, I am pleased to participate in this event, and I thank the organizers for the opportunity to share a few thoughts on Russia's approach and moving forces of the Putin's policy towards Ukraine and in a wider international context. Let me say, and let me start by saying that the current crisis does not result from any real threat to Russia's real security interests. It's generated by Putin's personal ambitions, his personal desire to change radically the geostrategic situation in Europe in favor of the Russian Federation. And also, I would like to emphasize that Putin has made strategic mistake last autumn, having put forward a public ultimatum to the West. He counted on the weakness and opportunism of the ruling elites of the United States and European countries. He was wrong, however. The West was able to demonstrate the necessary political will and to refute Russia's ultimatum. And it is principally important, in my understanding, that all NATO member states were able to develop and agree common response to Russian ultimatum. And this means that all Western countries, I mean, the United States and European states have some common political base on which they communicate now and will communicate with Russia in nearest future. And now it means that Putin is in a trap he made by his own hands. And the only mean at his disposal, I think, is an escalation of military threat against Ukraine up to an actual armed invasion. And of course, as many people here have said, many colleagues have said, the probability of war is very high at the moment. We all know that about 100 battalion tactical groups with support and command units are concentrated near the Ukrainian borders, which is approximately 70% of the total number of combat-ready battalion tactical groups available in the Russian ground and airborne forces. And also, in the next 1 or 2 weeks, the situation should clear up. First of all, at February 20, Russian military exercise in Belarus will end, and it will become clear whether Russian troops will be withdrawn from there or not. If not, then armed aggression will become almost inevitable. There are, of course, some developments, some signals that they will be withdrawn from Belarus, but we shall see. On the same day, on February 20, the Beijing Olympic ends. Also, it's important that fully mobilized troops, like Russian troops at the moment nearby Ukrainian border, cannot be kept for a long time in a state of full combat readiness, in tent camps, in marching columns, etc. They must either be thrown into battle or return to the barracks. Otherwise, military discipline and command efficiency are degenerating and troops lose their combat power. It's well known, I think. And the next point also, is important in my view. In the coming weeks, Putin will have to deliver his annual address to the Federal Assembly, to the Russian parliament, yet in fact to the entire Russian establishment. And he will, among other things, explain why he initiated the most acute military political crisis since the end of the Cold War, and what he achieved or what he don't achieve. At the same time, there is a reason to believe that not all of the Russian establishment is satisfied and happy with Putin's action. The date of performance of this address has already been postponed twice. First, it was supposed to take place at the end of January, then at the end of February. Now it's planned for the beginning of March. This is a very important date because, as I've said, Putin has to explain, to present his personal position on what has been done and what he intends to do further. So in this light, two most likely scenarios for Russia's actions in the coming weeks are emerging. First one is, of course, the military option. I think that the Kremlin will do his best to avoid heavy and protracted battles, and it hopes to achieve success in the first few days of armed hostilities. Moscow's strategy most likely will be strategy of blitzkrieg. In other words, to inflict maximum damage to the Ukrainian army in minimal time, and then it's important to offer a ceasefire and negotiating a political surrender of Ukraine. I do not think that Moscow believes that its troops is able to wage long and protracted war in Ukraine. I also don't think that Russia plans to occupy any significant part of Ukrainian territory, since this will entail the need to divert large forces to control the territory and to repel the counteroffensive actions of Ukrainian troops seeking to liberate the occupied lands. And in this light, the critical factor would be ability of Ukrainian troops, Ukrainian army and armed forces to stop the massive attacks by Russian forces. The second option is political. I mean, the second option for the Kremlin. And it seems that at the moment, the most likely scenario which is discussed in Moscow is the formal recognition of the independence of the so-called People's Republics, and deployment of large strike force of Russian troops in Donetsk and Lugansk occupied territory. This will solve domestic political problems for Putin. He may hope to announce a major victory, and thus which may lead him out of the trap into which he has driven himself by announcing of a publicly ultimatum to the West. You know that today the Russian Parliament, the State Duma, will discuss the address, the appeal to the president with a request to formally recognize independence of Donetsk, so-called Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic. If so, it will change radically the strategic and political situation around the Donbass problem. And of course, the Minsk agreements will be denounced officially. They will not be enforced. Oh, we will see. I do not know what if this scenario is realized, then what could be the repercussions for Ukraine. But anyhow, it removes the possibility of constant pressure on Ukraine through the Minsk agreement. And to conclude, even if war can be avoided, which I very much hope, Russian military pressure on Ukraine will continue in the coming months and years, since the transformation of Ukraine into a Russian protectorate is the strategic goal not only of Putin, of course, but not only of Putin, but of the entire current Russian ruling group, ruling force, ruling elite. Also, I cannot exclude that some long, boring, viscous negotiations on so-called equal security principle and so on will begin. And most probably some real issues also will be under discussion between Russia and the Western countries, between Russia and NATO, on real issues of security, such as security and confidence measures, missile deployment in Europe and in Ukraine, and so on. But of course, nobody can exclude new rounds of military tensions resulting from new attempts of Russian military pressure on Ukraine.
Professor.
Okay, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. And we are closing up or wrapping up a very interesting webinar. So far, the presentations have been, well, it's exceeded my expectations. So thank you very much to each and every one. And I hope that you would hold your breath for some questions, and that I hope that you can answer them. I'll start with one of mine. I'm asking all of you to address several topics. First is, as Professor Fedorov said, that Putin would have to take away, to have a reason to address the Federal Assembly with some sense of victory or some compensation for all the bravado that he so far has been engaged with. The second question is, so is likely the annexation of Donbass and Lugansk, because there is formally a problem, because in the definition of what would constitute a triggering off moment for the Western sanctions is the crossing of troops. And the crossing of troops effectively would constitute a moving of troops into the Donbass and Lugansk region that are controlled by separatists. That's one thing. The second thing is, what was the role of the Western policies in pumping up the financial wealth of the Putin's regime? Because now oil prices are all-time high, gas prices are all-time high, and a critical role in this has been played by climate policies and other extremities or extremes in Western policies. So, well, I'll stop with that and leave to other attendees to pose their questions. And anyone who would like to address, I'm looking, of course, foremost to Volodymyr Ogrysko and to Andrei Zagradnyuk. Vladimir has left, unfortunately, or if he's still on, please, and Mikhailo and Professor Fedorov, please. First to go.
Yes, yeah. If you allow me to say a couple of words, Okay?
Yes.
Thank you very much for this really very interesting exchange of views. I would say it is success only in this. Not saying about some very interesting ideas and assessments. Especially, I would like to thank Minister Shalamanov for the readiness he expressed to help Ukraine militarily. For the time being, probably it is the main problem we have. But I would like to come back to the idea that we should not very much concentrate our attention on some specific issues, because and many colleagues, especially Vladimir Milov, also said about this. We are now in the very important phase of the competition between democracy and totalitarianism, and this is the main point. Let us think a little bit more strategically. If we will win, then all items like Donbass issue, Crimea issue, Transnistria, Abkhazia, etc., will disappear. So let us try to understand that if now our Western alliance will say, okay, there is no war, very good, we will continue business as usual with Vladimir Putin, then we will have in a couple of months the same situation, or even worse. So in my view, the collective West should continue to this policy of pressure, this policy of containment. So otherwise, Russia will come back to the same point. Please, I would like to remind you what President Yeltsin said 1992 in American Congress, that Russia will be not communist, that Russia will be democratic, that Russia will be very peaceful. Where is this Russia? So my suggestion is not to stop the pressure on Putin, not to stop the pressure on undemocratic Russia. Otherwise, it will be the repetition of what we have now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's an ideal case of classic brinkmanship game, which Putin is engaged. And I totally agree with you that he might step back because of the lack of dominance in this particular case, but he would come back with another case of heightened up pressure. And he has the resources because his coffers are full with money because of the high energy prices. And that's something that the West ignored. Reagan won because he contained Russia by first and foremost containing the rise of energy prices. Without the control on energy prices, he would always have the resources to engage in military drills, in name it. Now, everybody, somebody else?
Yeah, I can add.
Thank
Do you
you.
hear me?
Thank you, Andrei. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for invitation. I do. First of all, let's go through this period. We'll see what happens, because indeed there are multiple various indicators. Some indicators are talking about that the troops are still there, and some indicators are talking at the same time about potential diplomatic resolution of this. For example, recently the military attachés were invited to, including a Ukrainian representative, were invited to the completion of these exercises, and we on 20th. So there are some signs that maybe situation will go to the de-escalation, but at the same time we shouldn't be relaxed at the moment, because again Putin has a number of plans, and they apply those plans when they see balance of risks and opportunity. So until it's over, it's not over, and we absolutely have to stay in alert, both diplomatically and militarily. Regarding what happens generally, of course, this is not about just one particular crisis. It's about the systemic crisis, an existential threat for not just for Ukraine, but for Eastern European security, because Putin does want to spread his control over Ukraine, regardless that like absolute majority of Ukrainians don't want that, and there is such a thing as a sovereignty and so on and so on. So he ignoring this, he's trying to do this, and he's trying for years, and he cannot, and so he would be choosing various other options, and it doesn't seem like they changed their mind at all. I mean, they're absolutely adamant to do that, but it's more than that. It's about compromising generally Eastern European security and NATO and so on, and NATO participation of Ukraine. I'm sorry, Ukrainian participation in NATO. It's just one little part of that. But let me remind you that when Putin occupied Crimea and started the war in Donbass, Ukraine wasn't striving to NATO. Ukraine at that time was a neutral state, and President Yanukovych, who ran away, he was actually pro-Russian. So the fact that all these statements that we can bring peace by ruling out Ukraine out of NATO plans, they're just not true, because actually these things will make things worse, since he will be reinforced with Putin will be reinforced with his strategy, and he will say, okay, it works, let's move on. And let's not forget about the Black Sea strategies for Putin, because they are it's a big addition to this, and acceleration of the forces there is just happening. So there's no de-escalation of even in sight right now. And we still consider that area as quite risky. And the bigger, but much higher level, so above Ukraine and even above the Eastern European security, is the question, how can we enforce international law? Because if the law cannot be enforced and if the law is ignored, then it's not a law. Then we're living in a lawless world. And obviously, it's a very difficult question, but in Europe, it would be critical because and generally in the world, because if Putin can start or stop wars and he can kill people and all that things, you create huge economical losses and get out of with no consequences. A matter of that spreading around the world is just and in other nations is just a matter of time. So what is international diplomacy doing right now and enhancing Ukrainian capabilities? It's not just protecting Ukraine. Is also not letting a bully to destroy the world order without the consequences. So let's keep in mind this big global importance of what's happening right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei. We have online Mihailo Samos now, and then would be Belizar's intervention. Mihailo.
Yeah, thank you very much. Absolutely agree with previous speakers and Andrei, and answering on your question, what could be the demonstration of the victory for Putin? Actually, I'm reading the Russian telegrams and some, the guys who is keeping the informational space. I think that they already started to say that they have a victory, because they have very interesting narrative that Ukraine now under the Western sanctions, because it was attempts to close the airspace. Some Western airlines stopped to fly to Kyiv, for example, or Ukrainian airspace. Some embassies moved from Ukraine. Some even military units of instructors moved from Ukraine. That Olaf Scholz actually yesterday told that Ukrainian question on the NATO membership is not on the table, is not on the moment. This is actually Putin asking that Ukraine should be out of the discussion for NATO membership. And of course, the psychologically Russians trying to demonstrate that after the military movement or around the Ukrainian border, Western countries just betrayal Ukraine and the message to Ukrainians: look at this situation. You were pretend to be in NATO, forget about it. You are just the territory used by Americans and Anglo-Saxons to fight against Russia. And this is very interesting point, how Ukraine and our allies and friends will react on it. We should act together, because in Ukraine now it's very interesting discussions in expert sphere. United States use these enormous informational attacks and talking about next Monday will be attack from Russia, and the embassy started to move from Kyiv, and it was awful. I mean, in the psychological stability in Ukrainians. So I think that United States and Ukraine should be together on this and react on the next steps of Russians, to be prepared that Russians will say that we already won in this hybrid conflict right now, and of course it will be next stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Velizar has raised his hand as well. Please, Velizar.
Yeah, thank you, Ilian. First, I think that we are in critical moment of finalizing the next strategic concept of NATO. And it will be very important how the case of Ukraine and case of the Black Sea is positioned in this strategic concept. Just to remind you that the strategic concept of '99 that was accepted in Washington was very much based on experience in Bosnia and Kosovo. And it was shaping how the NATO develops further. The strategic concept of 2010, accepted in Lisbon, was very much based on experience in Afghanistan and shaped the fight against terrorism, etc. So if now we are able, I mean, member states and Ukraine really to define the case of Ukraine as a global issue that will shape the development globally in the next 10 years. And the current instruments that Russia is using, I agree. So this pressure to close the airspace, this pressure to really close the shipping operation in Black Sea is something to recognize and to find a way to be reflected in the strategic concept. So this could change the situation in long term. Second, it is minor, but NATO Parliamentary Assembly is meeting in Kiev in May, just before the summit in Madrid. And I think parliamentarians have a serious role to play in this. On top of their role in principle, there is very strong proposal from the chairman of NATO Parliamentarian Assembly to establish in Brussels, as part of the next strategic concept, a Center for Resilience of Democracy, in order really to focus attention of NATO nations on the importance of democracy to be protected, not only by military means, but all other means. So all these are positive elements that could influence the situation. But for me, the main concern in near term, and this is more question to the colleagues that presented very interesting point of views, is what will be the Ukrainian reaction if in next several days Russia recognize Donetsk and Lugansk People Republic? Because the first reaction is to come from Ukraine and even to be proactive in this potential scenario, with to consolidate the position of NATO and EU. Thank you.
Very good point, Velizar, and I very strongly commend, kudos to everyone. I would like to invite Ukrainian colleagues, because Velizar has a point. We would all take the lead from what Ukrainian and how Ukraine reacts to a potential annexation of the Lugansk and Donbass, because then the sanctions would have to be triggered. Volodymyr, Andrei?
Okay, thank you so much for this very, sorry, Andrei.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, please, I will be after you.
Have you both, so.
No problem. Andrei, after you.
Thank you. So yes, so annexation is a very interesting story. So from one perspective, it basically destroys Minsk position of Russia. So Russia is currently very actively on a global scale every day, continues one specific phrase, saying one specific phrase, like a mantra, that Ukraine needs to be pressed to deliver Minsk agreement. That is a bit manipulative because it kind of, first of all, it moves the the whole responsibility from Russia as an aggressor to Ukraine. Secondly, it takes away consideration that a great part of Minsk agreement is actually breached by Russia. For example, moving out troops and disarming some formations and seizing the fire and so on and so on. And particularly the fact that they're giving out passports, and we understand that there are over 500,000 new Russian citizens now in those areas, obviously not in the spirit of Minsk. But at the same time, on every corner, every diplomatic platform, every day, they keep on saying that, and they put this in the media and so on. So it's a bit of manipulation. All that goes away if they recognize these areas. So question is, it's a bit contradicting to their Minsk pushing tactic. So so that's one thing. Obviously, then there would be no way, the whole concept of moving those areas with the controlled so-called government into Ukraine. So they start to influence political process inside Ukraine, and obviously stop westernization and kind of get Ukraine through those implanted regions, implanted political groups, to start to return the process of returning Ukraine back to the sort of Russian world. All of that will stop existing if they recognize. So that recognition has only one advantage for Russia, and they can use it only in a desperation, and that's raise the internal Russian sentiments, because they can portray it as a sort of saving of the brotherly sort of people from the nearby region, and etc. But then it's a huge blow on all other fronts. So I would be very careful to make these assumptions. However, as we see right now, they're getting ready for it. They are voting in Duma. They're doing all preparatory work for this recognition. So I believe if they recognize, that means they are quite desperate. Their internal situation is quite bad, and that means that they are already giving up some of their long strategic plans in order to save situation inside the country. That's my subjective opinion. Please.
But it's anybody. All our opinions are subjective, but that's what the
Of
word.
course. Yeah.
That's what we appreciate in sharing it. Volodymyr?
Yeah, only a couple of words. In my view, there will be no recognition of these so-called republics. Why? First of all, because this is very important tool for Russians to make pressure on Ukraine. And Andriy just said, every day they say, you Western countries should press on Ukraine to force Ukraine to fulfill Minsk agreements. If they will recognize this Ordlo, this Donetsk and Lugansk regions, it will be the same day that everybody will say that Minsk, so-called Minsk agreements are totally dead. They are in fact dead. But after that, it will be absolutely clear for everyone that is the Russian Federation who occupied not only Crimea, but also these regions as well. So for Russians, in my view, it's much more important to have this political tool to influence on Ukraine than to say, obviously, to everyone, they are a country occupier. That is why, in my view, they will have now two tools. One, military one. Okay, today we have already information that they decided to withdraw 2 military districts away from Ukraine. Okay, but tomorrow probably they will come back. The same role will play this Minsk agreement, so-called, to have another influence on Ukraine. And they will play today military, then politically, and they will continue without end. So once again, until the West will not be united to show Putin that this kind of policy is absolutely unacceptable for everyone, and this kind of policy, in fact, will destroy Russia. Before that, we will play the same play for many years, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you.
If it's possible, a couple words.
Only bribes, only
Yeah.
bribing the moderator would help.
Yeah. Yeah, about this, from the very beginning, Minsk agreement was the hybrid tools to pre-destabilization of Ukraine and make the pushing all of this territory. So actually, the sovereign territory under Russian control to the Ukrainian political body. And the next day, when Ukraine will complete this Russian algorithms of Minsk agreement, it will be a strong protest in Kiev and all of Ukrainian territory. And of course, Putin knows about it, absolutely clear. That's why they use this now, the hybrid game with Western, and they threaten that, okay, we will recognize the Minsk agreement, and all of you in Ukraine understand that it won't be like this. Okay, State Duma can recognize, they propose to Putin to recognize, but I am sure that Putin won't sign it because it will be end of the these hybrid tools against Ukraine. So this is like this. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we have a crystal ball to look into and to guess what's going to happen. Martin, well, please be very, very short because I need to wrap it up and close. Because Augie would be very angry at me.
I know that. Just a very brief comment, because you mentioned sanctions. It is crucial not to repeat the debacle of the 2014 sanctions and to really try to push together both US and EU authorities to cooperate in blocking the evasion of sanctions. After 2014, we saw that Russia was able to quite easily move funds from one jurisdiction to another by taking advantage of loopholes in the implementation regime of sanctions on EU level. In that context, it is critical to once again repeat that it is the EU objective to streamline its anti-money laundering legislation and really activate the work of its AMWA authority, the recently announced creation of an anti-money laundering authority, and use that targetedly against the evasion of sanctions. This would be a big boost of security.
Thank you very much. And final 3 sentences to wrap up. Now, very grateful to you all. It is a very interesting discussion, very informative. And your contribution has been remarkable. Kudos for everyone. The important takeaway is that this is not simply a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and it entails a lot more. We need to contextualize it into the inter-system sort of conflict or tension that is coming, and therefore we should. It's not a one-off thing. Many more conflicts would come, and thank you for that. We discussed the military aspect, we discussed the economic aspects, we discussed geopolitics, but I believe in finally what Martin said, ultimately, if it doesn't succeed, because nuclear option is no option, it's a dead option. The military option now, he sees that it's also a dead option, but hybrid warfare and corruption, exporting corruption, and undermining democracies from within, always keeping in mind the 1 trillion. Andrei Piontkovsky, the other day when I talked to him, and he said, it's not only the British 1 trillion, there's also a US 1 trillion. And actually most of the disinformation, and I'm very grateful to our Ukrainian friends, it didn't originate from Russia itself. It originated from Europe and from the United States. And that speaks a lot about the capabilities, the cross-border capabilities of Putin to engage. On that note, again, thank you very much. And I pass on le bâton, as the French say, for closing remarks to Igor Fedek, my friend and partner. And also, I probably would invite Ruslan as a host of this meeting to say hello and thanks to everybody. So Igor, yours.
Thank you very much. As far as I understand, I have very little time for the closing up. So I'll try to do my best to be very short. So first of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists for the very interesting and meaningful speeches that gave us the real pictures of what is going on around Ukraine and in relations between Russia and the collective West, and what we should expect in the nearest future, not only around Ukraine, but also in the situation in global scale. The informal task of our meeting, of our event, was to ask the several questions, such as what is currently happening around Ukraine, will Russia attack Ukraine, and if yes, how it will look like, and what should we expect next? So regarding the first question, as our panelists described us, the situation around Ukraine and in the world in general is quite tense, and it is likely to remain so in the future, because until Putin's regime is in power in Russia, there will be the permanent threat not only to Ukraine but to other neighboring countries, to European countries, to EU and NATO. Regarding the second question, and maybe perhaps the most important question of the event, whether Russia will attack Ukraine or not. So our panelists consider that there will be no large-scale military and long-time operation against Ukraine, and there will be no, and the probability of attacking Kiev is also very low. There are several reasons for that. Among them, the Russia doesn't possess enough troops for that it will be a disaster. Not only Ukraine, but also for Russia, that nowadays the eye of all over the world is on Ukraine, and for Russia it will be very difficult to explain, like in 2014, that those were some green men from nowhere. And one of the main reasons for that to attack Ukraine, Russia need first to have the destabilization within Ukrainian state. And as yesterday, the Secretary of National Security Council of Ukraine, Alexei Danilov, said, so without internal destabilization, Russia will not be able to cause any trouble for Ukraine. Nevertheless, as our panelists said, all kind of threats to Ukraine, or military, or economic, or energy, or information threat, they will remain. The highest zones, the zones of high tension, will be Donbas region, the eastern Ukraine, and the Black Sea. So, as also our panelists said, Putin has a lot of options in his hands. So he can use all of them, but the main of them will be, of course, these hybrid leverages, as we have seen for the last years. But it will also keep the military leverage, and from some time to time he will turn it on. So tomorrow, for example, we could see the de-escalation, but after some time there will be the escalation again, and this will be continuing again and again. Here I fully agree with Vladimir Milo. He said that Putin will come back. Will come back again and again, and to change this, this situation, there first have to be the change in state leadership in Russia. Until there is the Putin's regime in Russia, there will be the permanent threat to Ukraine and to other countries. So I'll stop here, and thanks again for this very interesting event, and hope to meet you again in our further meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Marian?
Well, I think it's in order to give the word to Ruslan for closing up.
Thank you. Well, thanks everyone, and thank you, Ilian, for inspiring this, and of course for the wonderful moderation. And it was really extremely interesting, and we saw all the options that we need to cover. I think, as I noted in the beginning, we need to look at us, and work on strengthening our resilience and closing the vulnerabilities gaps, including on money laundering, but also on our democratic procedures and processes. And of course, it's very welcome that we have a US re-engagement. I think we need to work a lot on Europe's unified response. And I look forward to welcoming you on further such seminars, and of course, working together with you on the ground to do these changes. Again, thank you very much to all our speakers today, and for the insightful presentations. Ilian, thanks again, and I look forward to meeting you all again soon.